And it's a pleasure and honor to address the convention this year. This is the first time I'm addressing it formally. I was only part of hosting it last time during Hanukkah a few years ago. My name is John Anderson, and I serve as the Christian Relations Director at Cry for Zion, helping Christians understand their history with the Temple Mount and how it relates to biblical theology and how it relates to the Jewish people. I am a Christian from an evangelical, charismatic background. I grew up in Sweden and in the United States and in Israel. I'm married to Sophia, and we have 5 wonderful children. And I currently, as Daron mentioned, study theology at the Scandinavian School of Theology. But for my topic today, it is the Third Temple and the Church. Over the past century, Christians who love Israel have recognized an organic link between Israel and the church. Today I'm not exploring how that link works in what they call in theology ecclesiology, but I'm exploring the significance of this link. Bible teachers like Derek Prince, who is well known and is buried not far from here, and especially my own father, have recognized a kind of parallel restoration happening. It finds biblical basis in scriptures like Joel chapter 2, verses 27 through 28, that are very well known in the Christian world. It says, "You shall know," or at least the second verse is well known, but listen to this. "You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and there is none else. And my people shall never again be put to shame. And it shall come to pass afterward," in other words, after that occurs, "that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions." Consider the following quick review of some points of history, of Christian history and Jewish history, of which you may not be aware. In the year 1517, the land of Israel came under a new Ottoman rule, which eventually resulted in a limited but important aliyah of Jewish return. In the year 1517, the Protestant Reformation was also born, a revolutionary restoration of the church, which fundamentally changed the church and its trajectory of where it had been for 1,000 years. Another year, in the 1880s, the Jewish Chovevei Zion, or Lovers of Zion movement, arose in Russia and Romania. At the same time, important forerunners to the Pentecostal and charismatic movements took shape in Russia and in Armenia, which eventually spread to the West. Many Armenians settling, some here in Jerusalem and some in California. If anyone's heard of the Kardashians, they might be descended from that. But that was from these Christian renewal movements in Armenia, that because of Christian spiritual renewal in Russia and Armenia, listened to prophecy that the Armenian genocide was coming and fled to California. That is why the Kardashians are in California, at least if they're part of that Armenian community, which I believe they are. The turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s, saw the revival of spoken Hebrew, with pioneers like Eliezer ben Yehuda. And then in the church, the Pentecostal renewal was born, with mass restoration of the charismatic gift of tongues, or prayer languages, a phenomenon that was unknown on a wide scale since the days and centuries of the early church. In 1904 to 1914, the second wave of Aliyah came with leaders leading pioneering Zionist families that settled in the land of Israel.
So I would like to equal the naysayers talking about the Temple Mount and how it will just cause instability in the Middle East, to establish a house of prayer for all nations, and most importantly, to allow Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. I believe them to be wrong, and I believe that a house of prayer for all nations and Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount is actually safety and security in our borders, in our capital here in Jerusalem, and to shut down civil unrest that is happening all around us. I will share this at the end of the convention. I have some really interesting quotes, because I want to talk about also where we see the future with the Temple Mount movements. Right now, I would like to make available time for our next speaker. John, I believe you're the one that's going to want to encourage you. Listen to what's being spoken here. Listen to the speakers. We have, again, a very diverse bunch of people here. We have Jews, we have Christians, some, if you will, secular, but I don't consider any of our speakers really secular. They just might appear to be. And you're going to have a very diverse presentations, each person coming from their worldview about the Temple Mount, and that's on purpose. And I hope you guys enjoy this convention. Thank you for those of you who came here personally, and for those of you who are at home, you don't see with the cameras. We have a nice live audience here that has come, so I want to really thank you for making the efforts to come during the Feast of Pesach. And for those of you who have been up on the Mount today, God bless you. I did not get to partake of that blessing today because of the convention, but some of you I've already met that have been up, and you've given some exciting reports. And really, God bless you for doing that, for making that mitzvah, for going up and showing that the Temple Mount belongs to the Jewish people, and that we are welcoming the nations to pray on the Temple Mount, just like we welcome at the Western Wall everyone from all faiths to come, and they can pray at the Western Wall. We don't bar them. We don't ask them their religious affiliation, etc. And that's what we're looking for to see on the Temple Mount.
Most people know our organization as an organization that focuses on Israel's biblical heartland. And even today I drove from Har Bracha, which when Jerome was talking about those radical settlers. I'm a Christian Zionist, but I live amongst those radical settlers. But it's a pleasure to be here because the Temple Mount is truly the nucleus of what the world and the anti-Israel propaganda media, as I like to call them, the fake news media, likes to consider the West Bank or the occupied territories, which in reality we call it the biblical heartland. We're based out of Samaria. We bring Christians from all over the world to work in Judea and Samaria. We serve the Jewish farmers at the Israel Guys. We bring content, media on a daily basis about the reality and the truth of what's happening here. But the media and the world sees the West Bank, Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria as all of this. Jerusalem is the nucleus. Jerusalem is the center. And the Temple Mount is the very, very center of Jerusalem. So when you talk about the conflict, when you talk about the story, today's topic is the very, very heart of that topic. So a little bit about my journey with the Temple Mount. About 6 or 7 years ago, I ascended the Temple Mount with my wife and a group of our staff and a big group of our volunteers. We were probably 30 or 40 people.
John?
If you're here, I'm assuming most of you have been on the Temple Mount multiple times, so you probably know things go in waves, right, on the Temple Mount. Sometimes it's quieter, sometimes it's more tense. But we've gone through periods. But 6, 7, 8 years ago, things were usually pretty tense up there. At a very minimum, you could expect to be shouted at and followed by the Waqf or by Muslim women that were up there. That was a minimum. At the most, you could expect to be pushed or shoved or threatened or maybe kicked off the Temple Mount. So this was a time period when things were typically very intense. Since this was one of our earlier times on the Temple Mount, because even though I've been coming to Israel for 15 years now, we didn't always know about the Temple. Temple Mount was something that the knowledge of it and the idea of its importance was something that came a little bit later into my journey here in Israel. And the first times on the Temple Mount, we didn't know even much about the sanctity of the site, the Jewish halakha, about where you should walk, where you should not walk. And even though I'm a Christian Zionist, we do our best. We really like to respect the Jewish holiness of sites that we're at. So on this particular trip, our tour guide took us on the upper platform. Today, we don't go on the upper platform because we respect the holiness of the site. But at that point, our tour guide took us on the upper platform. As soon as we stepped foot on that upper platform, we were immediately surrounded by a mob, mostly Muslim women, who began screaming at us and shouting at us, and pretty soon they started following us. Well, things got more intense, and it was a mob that grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and they were shouting so loud we could barely hear each other. We had children in our group, we had families in our group. The children were crying, some of the ladies had tears streaming down their face. It was an actual, I would call it a riot. Some of them began to get inside of our group, and we had to close together just to keep ourselves safe. And we were also walking very slowly because my wife's grandmother was with us, and she could only walk very slowly. We wanted to stay together as a group. We got to the middle of the mountain, and it got so loud, and it got so intense, and the shouting became so intense, and there was people mingling with our group, and people were being pushed. When finally the Israeli police forced their way in, and above the noise, above the throng, they pushed their way to the center, and they had to shout right in our ears. And what did they tell us? They said, "Your group is disturbing the peace, and we're going to escort you to the exit." Our group was disturbing the peace for simply walking around the Temple Mount. And unfortunately, that's the sad reality of what's happening for pretty much every single person that's a non-Muslim that ascends the Temple Mount.
Familiar with the story of the Israelis, the Israelites, and we learned this phrase that the Jews have here, Avadim Hayenu, we were slaves, and we understood and we connected so deeply. And so, when we read about Jesus, he was a rabbi. He was a Jewish rabbi. Now I know, I had to learn later, by the way, guys, that you don't say Jewish rabbi, it's just rabbi, because we already know that they're Jewish if they're a rabbi. For some reason, we just lock in our head, we have to say Jewish rabbi. But we saw Jesus as this Jewish rabbi, and so, in fact, all the people were Jews. So all of them were Jews, and all happened in Israel. All these things happened in Jerusalem. And so we, as foreigners and outsiders, way across the waters, just read these stories. And we read about this rabbi named Jesus, who said, there's a house of prayer for all nations. But as this young, he's kind of fired up, he goes in there and he starts flipping tables over. And he's very upset. In fact, there's one place in his story that he was extremely angry, and it was in the temple. And and because they were in there selling, things. He was very upset. In New York City, I came from Detroit, been in Detroit over 40 years, the motor capital of the world. We make most of the cars. Fords, General Motors, all their brands, and Chrysler, and so forth. But coming to Israel, and in Detroit, we have freeways and highways everywhere. But driving in Israel, and particularly in Jerusalem, I have concluded that some people are not nice. And I say to myself, it doesn't take too much to just be nice. And it's caused me to respond. And my wife has had to remind me, don't do that. I guess my point is that, one of the things that we hear, it should be a part of who we are, is that we're nice people. We have character traits that are welcoming to the outsider. that when the foreigner comes, as God says he will bring, he doesn't want to bring these foreigners and then they're met with very mean people. But people should be nice. And as I say, everyone doesn't have to be nice. But it does take an effort sometimes to be nice. And so, if you leave from what I'm saying with nothing else, and I do have something I think significant to say before I haven't got to it yet, is just be nice. Just be nice. Welcome the foreigner, whether they come from Asia or Africa or Australia or the United States or Europe, wherever they're coming from. Just be nice.
Go up to the next step. But we'll start with a very special day, which in Israel is marked. As you all know, during the 6-Day War, Israel redeemed the Temple Mount. Later that day, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan declared the following: "This morning, the Israel Defense Forces liberated Jerusalem. We have united Jerusalem, the divided capital of Israel, and we have returned to the holiest of our holy places, never to part from it again." Ever since then, ever since this dramatic day in 1967, Israel celebrates every single year Jerusalem Day on the 28th of the month of Iyar as an official holiday. This year it's going to be on May 18th. And on this day we pay gratitude to Hashem, God Almighty, for the wonderful miracles and for the reunification of Jerusalem. But the question is, okay, we've been celebrating that holiday for 56 years. What's next? And here I want to refer to you, those of you who are watching, those of you who are not living in Israel. Do you want to be part of one of the world's most important missions of this era? And I want to tell you, we call it the Zionist movement. What was the Zionist movement? In the end of the 19th century, Theodor Herzl called upon the people of Israel, and he said to them, "Guys, it's time to go back home." But the Jews were praying for Israel and Zion for so many years. So what was the difference between Zionism and non-Zionism? Zionism said, okay, there's prophecy, there is a mission, there is a destiny, but how's it going to happen? And Zionism said, we have to do it. Enough looking at exile as a punishment. Now exile is a sin. We have to do it. But this happened based on what happened throughout history. Throughout history, Jews all over the world, when they got married, they broke a glass and they said, we remember in Jerusalem. When they had celebrated Passover, they concluded their Seder and said, next year in Jerusalem. When they, 3 times a day in their prayer, they prayed for the building of Jerusalem. In their house, they always had a picture of Jerusalem. In their heart, they had Jerusalem. They had Jerusalem. When they ate a piece of cake, they said, God, thank you so much. The cake was so delicious. Don't forget to build Jerusalem. That's what it was. And based on that, comes up Herzl and says, guys, it's time to go back home. That was the Zionist movement. We're ready for the next level. We are ready that it shouldn't only be a national holiday as Jerusalem Day. It should be a universal Zion Day. And we should invite you all to be involved in turning Zionism from a national movement to a global Zionist movement. And I'm not talking about a global Zionist movement as Christians supporting the Israeli Zionist movement of returning to Israel. That's important, true. That's also important. That's very important. But I'm talking about now we have a mission. Temple Mount, as my dear friend Bishop Plummer said, in the name of Jeremiah, quoting Jesus in the name of Jeremiah. I don't know when you mentioned Jesus, what happened when I mentioned Jesus? And he says that we have a mission. Turning Temple Mount into a house of prayer for all nations is not just a mission, a prophecy that will happen. Just like Zionism, we had to make it happen. We have a mission to make it happen. We have to establish the global Zionist movement. And we have to do it. And we have to begin right now, this coming Jerusalem Day, to announce it as a global universal Zion Day. Of course, first of all, to pay thanks, gratitude to Hashem for the great miracles that the Temple Mount is once again in the hands of the people of Israel. And we must ask ourselves, beyond that, what is the essence of that place? That is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations. Now already we're announcing, we in the global Zionist movement are convinced that this city is an opportunity to all Bible believers to turn this day to a universal Zion Day in which people all over the world mark the commitment to Zion and towards the efforts to turn Zion into a house of prayer for all nations.